Hello, welcome to another edition of Crypto News with your host, Arthur. I'd like to get into a subject about the border. It's nothing new what's happening in the border. It's 11/23/2018. In case you haven't heard, there's kind of a operation called Hot Musket going on down at the border. Trump is sending troops down to the borders, close the border on Thanksgiving. This is nothing new. My research into my family history brought me... I can't find the original article that I had. It's in my files somewhere, but I can't look through every single one of them and find it. I don't know why I didn't name it something. I could go back and find it. But this is the closest thing I can find to the original article. This is one I had saved as well. So... the one I had said that there was 100,000 troops at the U.S. border, and, racism isn't new. The Spanish and the Mexicans were, hated once just as much as supposedly the blacks were. Even though a lot of the Spanish were white-complected, there was still much racism against them. More, I guess, in the form of, the culture racism. But this is very dear to me. What happened. I'm going to play a clip of a news clipping of a radio show from the Texas Standard on January 22nd, 2016. I'm going to tie it into today and kind of go a little bit into this subject of the Texas Rangers on the border.
You're tuned to the national news show of Texas. It's Texas Standard Time.
Paulino Cerda was a small ranch owner near Edinburg in 1915. When a group of Mexican bandits came through and demanded he open the gates that connected the ranches. Trinidad Gonzalez is Cerda's great-grandson.
He didn't really say no to these individuals, and apparently word got back to, the Rangers that this had occurred, and when they went to his ranch, they actually talked to him or questioned him in private. And while that was going on, my great-grandmother heard the gunshots.
The Texas Rangers killed Cerda, no questions asked. Gonzalez is now assistant chair for the Department of History and Philosophy at South Texas College. His family was one of many affected by some of the worst state-sanctioned violence in the history of the U.S. Today, he's part of a group of scholars working to get this part of Texas history recognized.
I like what these people are doing. It's pretty interesting that I'm not the only one on this trail here. This is actually one of the pictures that I had seen on another article that I can't find for some reason, that there was 100,000 U.S. troops down at the border, apparently along with Texas Rangers. This story is very important to me because on my grandmother's side, she was a Solis. They owned a great deal of land in Texas along a very important route, important to the Texas Rangers. And the story goes that the Texas Rangers in the early 1900s, I think it was actually late 1800s in the case of my grandma's family. And see, this happened before she was born. And the story goes that it was on a very important route, and I have proof that my ancestors actually owned this. They had a Spanish land grant. A Mexican land grant on that property, and so I can prove that they actually own this land. But the argument is that they stopped paying taxes on it. Well, it's because they were run off at gunpoint by the Texas Rangers, and they were not the only family that this happened to. And they were run off the land and went and settled in Edinburg, Texas, which is kind of the center of all this stuff, and built the largest house at the time in Edinburg. And so it's very important to me that this is talked about. Supposedly this is a myth and that this never happened. My family was run off their land, and there's been lawsuits to this day. We've been trying to get back that land. And that's why this HB 724 is very important to me. See, here's information that I found a long time ago. This is an article from National Politics dated 2018, basically continuing to say why the U.S. militarization of our border isn't new. This has been going on for hundreds of years and never stopped. Why isn't this talked about more? Okay, so I'm going to continue this clip from Radio Show of 2016.
John Moran Gonzalez, no relation, is also involved in the project. He teaches English at UT Austin.
Essentially, the matanza resulted because of reprisals by state and local authorities against a guerrilla uprising that had occurred.
Moran Gonzalez says the guerrilla uprising was small and not very well organized, made up of bandits or Mexican revolutionaries, so the Texas Rangers were called in to control the situation. But as we heard with Paulino Cerda's story, the repression was not just directed at the bandits. It was directed at the Texas Mexican population as a whole. Moran Gonzalez says between 1915 and 1919, hundreds, if not thousands, of Mexicans and Tejanos in South Texas were killed by the Rangers and other vigilantes.
In that sense, the project of policing throughout much of this era was also about the establishment of a racial order of white supremacy.
For the first time, this part of history will be acknowledged by the state of Texas through an exhibit at the Bob Bullock Museum called Life and Death on the Border, 1910 to 1920. Jennifer Cobb is the Associate Curator of Exhibitions at the museum.
The scholars and professors approached the Bullock with this idea. I never knew about it until I started working on this exhibit, and it was astounding that this is not public knowledge.
Cobb says the exhibit will be a look into what life was like leading up to, during, and after this violent period. It'll showcase court documents, photographs, and artifacts from the era, including one of Pancho Villa's saddles. But Trinidad Gonzalez, whose great-grandfather was killed, says the exhibit is more than just about the victims.
Also, a way of celebrating our resiliency as a community against these conditions to respond by pursuing our civil rights and our rights as equal participants within our society.
This violent period spurred what would become the Mexican-American Civil Rights Movement. One important document on display is a complete transcript of the 1919 Texas legislative investigation that looked into the Texas Rangers' actions and found them guilty. Again, John Moran Gonzalez.
This was the first time that the Texas Rangers had ever been called to be held accountable for atrocities against
First
the Texas
time.
Mexican community
The
by
first time.
the legislature. Prior to that, the Texas Rangers knew anything, pretty much anything goes.
Moran Gonzalez and other scholars are working to erect historical landmarks and develop a traveling exhibit examining this forgotten period of Texas history. The Bullock exhibit will open to the public on Saturday and run through April. I'm Lucia Benavides for the Texas Standard.
Okay, so I'm not the only people trying to work on exposing these truths, thank God. There isn't really anyone on YouTube that I can find doing a whole lot of it, and that's why I'm trying to fill that gap. But anyway, I hope that y'all found the information interesting. I'm going to try to put since this is relatively newer information that I've got so much information, but I haven't saved all the links and all these things. And all through the years, so I'm having a hard time referencing some of this data. So I'm going to try to find newer information as well as the older information, so I can give you all links to some of this stuff. But anyway, I hope you all found it interesting, and I will continue to bring y'all more information as I can figure out how to put it together in a way to present it to you guys.